The International Court of Justice in The Hague could announce emergency measures tomorrow in a case brought by South Africa against Israel over its conduct of the war in Gaza. South Africa has accused Israel of genocide. Israel has dismissed the charge as grossly distorted, and it says it has a right to defend itself. The Israelis have in the past boycotted international tribunals and investigations, but they have engaged with the case at the ICJ, sending lawyers to the hearings in The Hague. So, what might we expect from the court tomorrow, and could it have an impact on the ground? We can speak now to Antonios Tsanakopoulos, Professor of Public International Law at Oxford University. Thanks for joining us, Professor. They're not going to rule on whether it's genocide, right? So what might they rule tomorrow?
So, yeah, you're right. They're not going to give us a decision on the merits. So they're not going to go into the substance just yet. But perhaps it may be useful to clarify who they are, because there's quite a lot of confusion. So what we're talking about here is a case being brought to the International Court of Justice, which is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. So let's say the top court of the UN, but it's a court only for states. So it has nothing to do with criminal law or crimes. So we're talking about genocide, but effectively what we're talking about here is the interpretation application of the Genocide Convention and the obligations that states have under that convention. Mm-hmm. And so the only way for states to go to The Hague, to go before that court, is that they have to agree somehow to go there. And Israel generally does not agree to go to court on anything, but it has signed the Genocide Convention. And so what South Africa did in this case, the only option that it had was to actually try and argue that what is happening in Gaza is genocide in order to take Israel to court under the Genocide Convention, which is the only convention under which it could take it. So in a way, South Africa is required to argue that what is happening is genocide.
And we'll get into what a difficult case that is to argue a little bit later. But what about tomorrow? What might we hear from the court?
So what's happening now is that immediately South Africa asked for provisional measures. So that's, as you said, an urgent order that it is requesting from the court. And this is a usual thing that states do, but it happens in domestic jurisdiction as well, is where you go to court and say, can I have an immediate order, please, until you have the time to hear the full argument and think about the merits and so on and so forth. It will take a very long time. So until then, can I have an immediate order, because the case is urgent and there may be irreparable harm.
So what are we talking about? A cessation of hostilities or what?
So they have asked for a number of things, including the cessation of hostilities. So the first thing that they ask is an immediate suspension of the military operation in Gaza.
And how likely do you think that is?
So, to tell you the truth, I mean, there's no way to tell in advance, but in a somewhat similar case brought by Ukraine against Russia, again under the Genocide Convention, which you may remember immediately after the Russian invasion in 2022, the court did order an immediate suspension of the hostilities.
Which didn't happen.
Which, of course, did not happen.
So let's say that the court does order a cessation of hostilities or even a pause to allow aid in, let's say. How likely is it that Israel will comply with that? Can anyone enforce it?
So let me clarify this about enforcement, because it's a general confusion about international law that people say, oh, but nobody complies with it, and what's the point, and so on and so forth, and there's no one to enforce. We're talking about states. States are not physical persons like you or I. And unfortunately, what happens to most people, even to students in law, is that we're socialized in criminal law. So the way that we understand enforcement is somebody grabbing you by the neck and putting you in jail or putting you in chains or fining you and generally sort of like pushing you around.
I'm simply wondering if something might change as a result of whatever the court rules
things have
tomorrow.
things have already changed in a way, already from the bringing of the case. So the impact on the ground is already there. In what sense? Immediately after South Africa brought the case, we saw Israel sort of like backpedaling on the rhetoric a little bit, coming out and trying to clarify particular statements. We already saw Italy indicate a few days ago that it has stopped all shipments of arms to Israel for fear of being considered aiding and abetting potentially genocide or other violations on the ground. So,
Antonios Tsanakopoulos, thank you very much for explaining that.